Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another walk in the garden. I suppose is that's a good enough name. I think I like it. It's I've kind of briefly alluded to that idea earlier, and I think it's nice. It kind of gets across the idea of what I really want to do here. And it also happens to be around the time for Chinese New Year, and Genshin, being a Chinese game, has a special Lantern Rite event going on right now. So I figured now's as good a time as any to take a walk through Liyue Harbor. But also, I was chatting in the Discord, which, as always, is linked in the description if you have your own questions, etc. But a friend of mine had a few questions that he kind of wanted me to, ponder and give my thoughts about. And I thought they would be a rather interesting topic, so I figured I'd just, make a video about it. So, the crux of the issue, I think, was it was focused on three big questions, I think were really what we were talking about. The first one was, how do I justify placing my ideas over those of others? So, like, um, I guess I would say in terms of like what do we teach people in school? Like how do I justify the fact that I am right, therefore we should teach this, or I'm right, therefore this is the principle on which we should, um, you know, on which we should base our ideas and philosophies and things like that. It's kind of that in a universe where we reject objective founding like that. How do I know that I am correct? Basically, is what I was kind of interpreting that as. Um, and then the second question is, we were sort of talking about the idea of um, aggression is the word that we were using, and it's sort of like, um, well, the question itself is like, if you take a more passive approach, then you are going to end up with people who are not going to take as passive of an approach. And those people are going to end up being the ones that dominate the political scene and the cultural scene and all that. And so your passive approach, which although it may be in some sense morally better, it may end up leading to its own destruction as it's wiped out by the people who reject it, basically. So the question is like, is it really wise to have a peaceful approach that undermines itself? Is I think the way that I would phrase that. And then the third question was kind of branching off of that. Historically, we've seen that aggression and that sort of aggressive go-getter attitude does have some merit to it in the sense that it is pragmatic, right? It gets things done, and so it has a track record of success. But that also means that it tends to do some pretty horrible things when it gets a little too aggressive and it really gets out of hand. But if we're talking about a purely pragmatic approach, then the mere fact that it is getting stuff done while a passive approach is less likely to do so, does that mean that aggression is in some way superior? And in particular, this friend of mine brought up the fact that pretty much every country that exists today, and really I would even go so far as to extend the principle to just about any organization in general. Even private companies have to be in some sense aggressive and push themselves into the market and things like that. And any organization that continues to exist and survives is going to be aggressive. And so the question is, doesn't that sort of imply that aggression is in some way superior to pacifism? That, it is necessary in order to get things done, I suppose, is another way to look at that. Um, Although I would note that the question was specifically about it being superior, which I thought was kind of an interesting train of thought, and I don't know if my friend meant it this way or what, but it does sort of have some implications behind it, and we'll get into that. But for now, I just kind of wanted to start off with, um, part of the event going on is that you can release these little lanterns and send messages to people, which I think is kind of cute. I'm gonna collect it because they get points for that, which they can get rewards for. So yeah, there we go. Oops. So, um, as I was thinking about this, I'm realizing that the particular path that I have taken in my life has sort of brought me to a point where I am currently a little more interested on the in the spiritual side of things, like in internal development and self-cultivation, I suppose you could say, which is a joke that you would only get if you happen to be playing Genshin Impact during this time of year. So, but anyway, I'm at the risk of sounding like I'm just, dismissing the question outright, which I'm not. I'd like to first point out that this question assumes that you are effectively ignoring the spiritual and moral aspect of it. I suppose by this question, I mean specifically the third one, that aggression is, in some sense, superior. Um, because, as I said, it is necessarily assuming a very pragmatic approach and, for lack of a better word, worldly sort of viewpoint, which I know may trigger some groups of people, but I don't mean it in the Jehovah's Witness worldly sense, but more in the sense of just like lost in the story of the world around you. And I've brought up Buddhism in these past walks in the garden, and the word that they would use is maya, illusion, or at least it's usually translated as illusion. And that, as I understand the topic, I'm coming to realize I don't think that's a very good translation of it, at least not to someone who's still learning and just kind of still in the process of understanding the philosophy behind it. But it is the idea behind illusion of maya is essentially that all of this stuff that we use to operate in the everyday world, things like money and cars and stuff like that. I think I alluded to this in a previous walk like this, but like at the end of it, all of these things are either just ideas. That's one that I made. They're either just ideas that we use to describe the world around us, as in like a car, for instance. Like a car, like I said in a past episode, if we take a tree or a rock, what it really is fundamentally is just a pattern of energy. It's just a subset of all of the energy in the universe, and it's us that draws the line between that particular subset and the rest of it, and we call it a rock, a tree, a car, whatever. And then we forget that we drew those boundaries, and we think that it's a solid thing in and of itself that needs to be preserved and clung onto. And that is maya, that is illusion, that is what we forget and get lost in, and that's what causes us to suffer. And to circle back, what I think, like, this question in and of itself kind of brings itself into that deliberately, right? Because it's kind of assuming that we're working in the framework of like how to achieve the best outcome in this world of conceptual ideas and things that we are working with for pragmatic reasons, but don't necessarily exist fundamentally. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I just think that it's something to keep in the back of your mind as you're going through this, because I think the kind of extreme. I don't necessarily want to say extreme, but the like, if you really want to make it super simple, just forget the whole thing, go live on a mountain somewhere, and just meditate for the rest of your life, and you don't have to worry about anything ever again. It's like that's obviously that's oversimplifying, but that's kind of my point. Is we something in us does call us back into the world of Maya, and it's interesting, and it's fun, and it poses some interesting philosophical questions, and so I think it's worth exploring. But like I say, I think it is also worth keeping that in the back of our mind. I do wish you could pet the dogs. And so I thought it was worth bringing up. So, I guess, how do we tackle these sorts of questions? And I don't, like I said, I'm at a point in my life where I am kind of exploring this spiritual side more so than the pragmatic side. Like it's the way that my mind is right now, like the shape of my own mind, makes it a little difficult for me to address this properly, I think, unfortunately, because, like, my instinct is, like, I'm having a hard time getting invested in that, because it's causing so much stress. Like, the way the world is going right now, like, I am a little more concerned with developing my own internal spirit, for lack of a better word, and that's just where my mind is right now. And again, I'm not saying that either version is good or bad, and again, I think that the word superior, which was explicitly used in the question itself, that kind of rang some alarm bells, because I don't really like talking about things in terms of superior or inferior, but like, that's just where my mind is right now. And so I can only hope that I can address these questions sufficiently thoroughly, and give decent, interesting answers to them. But I figure let's give them a shot. And so I suppose let's start with the last question, which is, does the fact that aggressive tendencies tend to be more successful, does that imply some sort of superiority of aggression as a policy? And so I guess, to reiterate, and sort of expand my point a little more, is I don't really like thinking about the terms superior and inferior, because not only do they necessarily imply some sort of objective framework, which I don't accept, and not only is it a judgment that clouds your own mind in some sense, but also, like, it's so loosey-goosey that, like, it almost loses its meaning by even trying to define it. Like, the more you try to define it, the less meaning it has. So, like, I think the most straightforward interpretation is to just say, if we're taking the assumption that we are choosing to play the game of Maya, we are choosing to interact in the world. Oops, sorry, one sec. Okay, there we go. If we're choosing that sort of framework, then okay, so we have these things that we want to accomplish to play the game, and make something of it, and so these aggressive tendencies will tend to get you those results, and so I guess we could say it is practical, certainly, but superior almost implies, like, desirable, and like I say, objective, which is something that I think is to be treaded cautiously. Like, that is a domain that you really have to be very careful with, and I think that you're better off just kind of leaving it alone, to be perfectly honest. But without waffling on too much and just trying to answer the question straight up, like, as I understood, like I said, this person that asked it is a friend of mine. We've known each other for quite some time, and I like to think that I know this person well enough to understand what they're trying to ask. And so, in a very pragmatic and straightforward sense, I guess I would say yes. There is some sense in which aggression is the preferable option to passivity, and the reason I'm so cautious about it is because it's so easy to tip it from. And I suppose I should clarify, by aggression, I don't necessarily mean being a jerk to people, but I would say the more general idea is like the concept of making a conscious, active effort to maneuver events into the outcome that you want, even if that means producing a lesser outcome for other people, right? So, like, if we go back to a private company, like, they're going to do the things which benefit them more and put their competitors at a disadvantage. And the whole game of politics is this kind of maneuvering of putting your opponents on the back foot and getting your policies and, on the grand scale, your nation's interest above those of other organizations. And I think there is some aspect to that. I think, like, if we're treating Maya as a game, that is the goal of the game. That is kind of what we, as a collective, what humanity has decided is the game we want to play. And that just makes sense from a biological and a cultural and a sociological perspective. Like, of course we want the best outcome for ourselves. Like, that's almost trivially true. And of course it's going to be the case that someone who is sufficiently willing to, be ruthless about it is going to have the most success in getting those maneuvers into the position they want them to. The danger, I think, is that while this idea can apply on a larger level, it doesn't really work so much at an individual level, because when it's an individual, not only does it just literally get more personal, like you're literally screwing over a person or a small group of people, but it also, like, just the scope of it changes. Like, there's a difference between what do we consider to be the thing that we teach students. Like, what do we want to prioritize as a society in terms of our education, our society, our distribution of funding, stuff like that. There's a difference between, like, I want to fund schools more than I want to fund, I don't know, the military, or just to, put two just to throw examples out there, I guess. Like, I want to fund this over that. There's a difference between that and I want to make sure that I have the best outcome, even if it means screwing over this other group of people, right? It's, I want to fund A over B, versus I want to make sure that A gets funding and B does not, right? Like, there's just so many levels to it that it gets complicated and tricky, and it gets hard to really draw those lines somewhere. But in the framework that I think the question was being asked, which I suspect was a little bit more of, like, on the political level, I think this is where spirituality comes in, really, where I think the reason why we get so uncomfortable with topics of aggression, and I guess I might even say assertiveness rather than aggression, because that's really what we're asking about. I think where aggression is just assertiveness taken to an extreme. right? Where not only are you trying to maneuver yourself into a better position, but you're going to go out and beat up that other person. Whoops, speaking of which, you're going to go out and do something about it and start to throw hand. Like, you know, it starts to get a lot more physical and dangerous for people involved. You know, like that, it's just a different line has been crossed. And that, I think, is why we get so uncomfortable with aggression. And why I think I want to sort of distinguish it from mere assertiveness. So, I guess when I think of it that way, I would reframe it as it's not really aggression that is in this sort of assumption of pragmatism framework that is superior. It's not aggression, it's assertiveness that's superior. It's being able to do, like, it's having a broader scope of what you're willing to do to accomplish your goals, right? I'm going to try and skirt around these guys. Like, the more that you're willing to do, the more you are able to get done what you need to get done, right? Like, I dare say that when you put it that way, like, it almost seems trivially true that it is superior in the sense of being more likely to do what needs to be done, or what you have determined is the better solution. And so I guess my answer to the question would be, it's not aggression, it's assertiveness, and we can grade its success as a correlation between, or I suppose we can talk about it in the sense of there is a correlation between being willing to do more and being able to get more done. And the issue with aggression is aggression, quote unquote, is when you start to cross the line a little bit and your horizon for what you're willing to do starts to become a little too broad and you start to hurt people. That is where I think we're starting to run into issues. And that is where we start to get uncomfortable with ideas like aggression, you know? And I think that's perfectly fair. And what is the solution to that? I think the solution to that is for we as a culture to become more cognizant of the distinction between assertiveness and aggression. There's still more of them? Really? Okay. We as a culture need to become more aware of those lines and stuff like that, so that we can understand that when we are aggressive, we run the risk of, again, for lack of better words, tainting our own souls, I think. Because when you are in an aggressive posture, you start to view people as your enemies and as hostile creatures and as things to be destroyed. And that's when you start to have real problems, because you're introducing hatred and hostility. Sorry, I'm going to heal my characters up as we go here. You're starting to introduce these negative emotions into yourself, and that's when you are lost, basically. And I think, sadly, that we are at that point as a culture where we are lost. Like, I don't think I need to explain to anyone who has been paying attention these last couple of years that, like, we have just become so engrossed in this idea that we have to be, you know, successful. We have been so inundated with this very pragmatic approach that we've started to lose our own way. And that's where these problems are coming from, is we've crossed the line from assertiveness to aggression, true aggression. And even so much so that I would argue that the point is no longer to accomplish the things that we set out to accomplish, but it is specifically to screw over the other people, right? Like, we don't, like, we're getting to the point where we impose these things not because we want them done, but because the other people don't want it to be done. And that's just such an antagonistic and self-defeating idea. I don't want to say self-defeating because that kind of has its own meaning and terminology, but like, you are hurting yourself when that is your guiding philosophy. And that, I think, is why we're in such deep trouble right now, is because that's where we're sinking. And how do we get out of it? I gotta be honest, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. The thing that I see as the most practical way for an individual to do it is to, I mean, obviously, I'm biased. I'm like, again, this is just where my mind is right now, so of course I'm going to think this way, but I think cultivation of mindfulness. Sorry, I'm going to do something real quick. Okay. Cultivation of mindfulness and these practices, like, that's the thing I'm loving about Buddhism, is like, it's very much not about what you believe. It's more about, like, just do it and see what happens, like, I have found myself, like, I have seen the practical results of it, even though maybe I don't keep up on it as thoroughly and rigorously as some people do. I have seen practical benefits from doing this. And so when I say I think that cultivating mindfulness and maintaining that mindfulness as we interact with the world, I'm not just saying that because I've converted to Buddhism. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's more like I've taken the time, I've sat down, and I've done it myself to whatever degree I have. Like, I don't choose to put it in terms of, like, I'm not very good at it or anything like that, but I have cultivated it and I've seen the results. And so I say with confidence that if people were to sit down and take the time to specifically understand these concepts and bear them in mind as we interact with these people in the world, I think that we would start to come to a better situation where we're not always at each other's throats like we have been in the last, I would argue 30 years. Like, we're going back so far that it's basically as long as I can remember, where, during the Bush administration, which that's really pushing it for me. I was a pretty young kid during the Bush administration, and everybody was still riding high on 9/11 patriotism. But, even then people were calling Bush an idiot and talking about, as the war dragged on, the war against terror, so-called, like, people were starting to be like, they were losing confidence. It wasn't as loud because, like I say, we were still riding high on post 9/11, but, people were already making jokes about we're there for oil and stuff like that. And then during the Obama administration, like, Jesus, do I even need to say it? Like, the whole, he was born in Kenya and his middle name's Hussein, like, that, I think, is when it really was just super obvious. And then after that we had Trump and Clinton and Biden and now Trump again, and it's been chaos. It's been nuts for the last, 30, 40, 50 years, whatever. But anyone who's even around my age range, I think, would understand what I'm talking about, where it's like, my whole life has been consumed by this, and it's noticeably worse. Even though I was barely conscious as a kid during the Bush administration, like, I've seen it. I've seen it changing as we've gone through consecutive administrations. And I guess I'm sort of meandering around the point that, like, that is what I think I'm talking about when I say that we've already lost our way as a culture, as an American society in particular. And if this reaches anyone in other countries, of course I don't mean to exclude them, and I'm sure they have their own problems of their own. And I have no doubt that this issue is a worldwide phenomenon, and I bet with how connected our world is through the internet, it truly is global, and it is happening as a trend overall in the human species. You know, it's not just America. It's just I'm more keen to it as an American. So if you're in another country, I'm sure you can think of your own examples. I could not and probably don't need to point them out. But I would encourage you to really think about the idea of cultivating, to bring it back to where I lost my train of thought and sort of rambled for a bit. Cultivating mindfulness and cultivating compassion and genuine love for people, and then we will start to naturally build these bridges back up again, you know. And I would absolutely love it if we got to a place where Americans were just so, you know, thrilled to be Americans as we were after, you know, after 9/11, and we were taking action, and we felt like we were riding high, even if it was built on a tragedy, a real tragedy, and it led to war. And even though American casualties were relatively light, I admit that I don't know what the numbers are, but I have no doubt that so many people died that didn't have to die. You know, like the incident that I am thinking of in particular that has sort of resonated with me since I learned about it was, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I think it's the Nisour Square massacre, which, if you don't know about that, look it up, but it was kind of crazy. And just that incident by itself is just so indicative of this sort of hostility that's been building up. And I think if we took the time to really cultivate, you know, introspection and love and compassion and all these things, this would naturally smooth itself over. And that being said, on the grander scale, I'm almost inclined to say that I'm not. I recognize that this sounds kind of horrible, but I almost kind of don't even really want to do much about it, because I feel like this is just a temporary dip in our moral well-being, perhaps. And I do believe that one way or another, this will pass. And I don't mean to say it like, I don't want to sound like I'm being callous about it. And it really does strike me that the way that it passes could be devastating. And it could be in the form of eradication of something. Of what? I don't know, and I don't want to think. But I have sort of come around to this idea that, like, sometimes bad things happen. And sad as it is, sometimes it paves the way for new things. And I think that there is merit to the idea that this is just one of those undulations. And not that we shouldn't do anything about it. Like, I don't think that's at all, you know, the way to think about it. But more so that, like, I don't think that me, personally, I don't think that I am going to accomplish much by getting myself worked up and you know, desperately trying every avenue that I can to try and fix the problem. Like, I don't think that's going to help. What I think is going to help is to cultivate my own spirit and spread that to others. And that's what I hope that I'm doing with this project, is I'm giving my perspectives, and I'm hopefully, you know, walking with people metaphorically and building up a sort of camaraderie by physicality, I suppose. How do I want to, like, by doing it, right? Like, I'm building this up not by making it happen via some policies or by trying to adjust our institutions or anything like that, but by just coming up with these ideas and talking with people about them. Oh, sorry, getting distracted. And that's kind of, I think that's going to be maybe not the approach, but certainly one of the better approaches, because I think we've tried forcing it through, and it hasn't been working out. So maybe it's time we tried something else. You know? And maybe I'm not explaining it correctly, but I hope I'm getting the idea across, where it's like, I think what we should do is look out for ourselves, but also look out for each other, and the one will naturally lead into the other. And to circle back to the actual question, which I'm realizing I deviated from quite a lot, I hope you'll forgive me, that is kind of the nature of this project, I think. But there is a time and a place for assertiveness, and I might even go so far as to say there is a time and a place for aggression. But it is dangerous in the sense that it can very easily tip over the edge, and the way that we counteract that is through mindfulness. And we can cultivate mindfulness, and by cultivating it in ourselves and then also spreading it to those around us, we can cultivate it as a society. I suppose is kind of what I'm getting at. I hope that sort of gets the idea across of how I'm thinking about this problem. And so I guess with that, we may as well move on to the second question, which I think leads on nicely, is if we sort of take a passive attitude to it, don't we run the risk... sorry, I'm going to check on where I'm going here. Okay, I think I know where I want to go. Okay. Don't we run the risk that our own passivity will destroy that passive, like... I'll just read the question as I wrote it down. What good is peace that leads to its own destruction? And is that really wisdom? And to put it another way, if our peaceful and passive approach lays the groundwork for more assertive and aggressive people to come in and destroy it, is that really wisdom? And this is, again, where my mind naturally goes to this idea of there are undulations in these sorts of ideas, and yes, they may destroy it, but that doesn't mean it won't arise again at some point in the future. And I understand that that's not satisfying to most people, and so I don't want to just say that and leave it at that. Though I do think that as you go down this path, that sort of thinking kind of brings itself up occasionally, and it's a natural consequence of this path that I'm on. But I also want to, again, assume that we're playing the game of Maya, and I want to approach this pragmatically. You know, how do we actually find a solution to this in the game, in the world that we're operating in? And so I think, firstly, I think it is a big step to just tie that back into the difference between assertiveness and aggression, where you can be assertive and also peaceful. You know, you can be assertive without screwing people over. And when you start to screw people over, that's when it starts to cross the line into what I was calling aggression earlier. And I would point out that this is not the way that my friend was using the term aggression, I don't think. Although, as I say it out loud, perhaps they might come to agree that that is a good definition. Or maybe they won't. I don't know. I guess when this video comes out, we can talk more about it. I would love for that. And I would also love for other people to join the Discord, link in the description. Sorry, I gotta. It helps the algorithm. Like, subscribe, comment, etc. But, like, I would like to explain and sort of be more careful with our terms, and I think that is a big part of making sure we're all on the same page and getting the ball rolling toward a pragmatic solution. Hopefully without getting too bogged down in terminology and stuff like that. So, to address the actual point itself, excuse me, if we're talking about on a personal level, I think that the answer is just no. It's not self-defeating to prioritize peace over assertiveness, even like just regular old assertiveness, because I think that when you start to walk down this road, you naturally start to lose a little bit of interest in assertiveness as a principle, because you start to think less and less about, again, worldly matters, at the risk of sounding a little too Jehovah's Witness-y. I'm sorry. That is where I know that term most, is with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Is they kind of refer to people outside of their community as worldly, and so ex-witnesses may sort of flinch at that term a little bit. So forgive me, and maybe even other denominations will use that term too. But I'm sort of meaning in this sort of pragmatic, in the world of Maya sort of sense, you know. But anyway, I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, but I'm sure you're. Oh yes, so like I don't think it is. Like you sort of naturally lose interest in that. Not that you stop caring. Like that is kind of part of the practice, is to balance this whole, like, yes, like, okay. So in Buddhism, there is a system of what is called the two truths, which is ultimate reality and I forget what the other term is, but it's basically practical reality, where we can say things like, I meditate, and I help people, I love my family, and things like that. That is conventional reality or pragmatic reality. I think it's conventional reality is the way that it's translated into English, because bear in mind that all of these terms are originally in like Sanskrit or Pali or something like that, but I think conventional reality is the way it's translated. And so the idea is we can say things like, I believe this, I meditate, even though in the ultimate reality, the practitioner will recognize there is no such thing as I, because I is, again, just a subset of everything that's going on in the universe. And so I guess the simplest way to think of it is ultimate reality is seeing the whole universe as a thing, and then conventional reality is, you know, drawing those lines and playing the game. And so to bring it back a little bit, I don't think that there is necessarily a conflict between choosing wisdom and like I think that it's not necessarily self-defeating on a personal level to choose wisdom over assertiveness, because of this two truth sort of doctrine, where it's like, for one thing, on some level you may find that you're willing to give up more than you really thought. Oh, I zoomed out. Is it attacking me? I think we're fine. You may find that you're more willing than you thought to give these things up. That is kind of part of the practice too. But also, as you sort of develop this in yourself, you also start to find ways to maneuver things that you hadn't really thought of before. Like, I think the most obvious example would be ways of compromise, especially if you are, in fact, finding that you are more willing to give things up than you really initially thought. Sorry, I'm just trying to plan my route a little bit. So I guess to bring it back to the question a little bit more, it's not necessarily self-defeating on a personal level, because if you strike that balance, then you can still be assertive and also maintain your own personal sense of wisdom. I don't want to say enlightenment necessarily, because that's a word that kind of raises a few hackles on occasion. And I think it's easy for people to get a little tied up with it. But that's kind of its own discussion. I think, but the point is, you don't have to sacrifice your own peace. Like, peace is something that you can cultivate however you want, effectively. Like I said earlier, sort of half-jokingly, if it's really causing you problems, you can just go and live on a mountain and not bother with everything. Like, that is an option that's available to you if you really want it. And if not, then it's sort of incumbent on you to practice, to take it on yourself, to practice and to cultivate that sort of balance in yourself. But also, even on the level of, like, isn't it necessarily the case that it sort of lays the groundwork for truly aggressive people to start to wipe the floor with everyone else, to put it bluntly? I think there is a risk of that, certainly, but for one thing, I don't think that's necessarily, to go back to the phrasing of the question, is it wise to allow these things to happen? Well, I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think that's necessarily on the same spectrum, right? Like, I don't think that, like, that's almost like saying, is it wise to fail at your task? It's like, it almost kind of doesn't even make sense, you know? Like, it's just kind of a different question. So I guess I would answer the question by pointing out the flaw in it, and by trying to refocus it on saying, well, if we have wisdom, if we have peace, and we have what I called concordance in this discussion, then aggressive, like truly aggressive policies can be worked around, and it doesn't necessarily pave the way to its own destruction. And so, to expound on the idea of peace versus concordance, I think I came to the conclusion that peace is what happens within a person, within an individual, as in it is the sense of camaraderie with people around you. It is the sense of facing the world with equanimity and calm. It's the way that you react to the people around you. And concordance is a description of activities between people, where you can be, like, concordance is sort of the idea, the stereotypical idea of, like, I don't care what you do so long as you don't bother me with what I'm doing, right? Like, it's that sort of, I kind of want to say very American mindset of, like, you're free to do what you want as long as you leave me alone, kind of a thing. And frankly, I don't think that's just American. I think that's pretty common throughout. Oh no, Noel, no. Hold on, I gotta buckle down here 1 sec. Okay, I think I've got a better handle on it now. Sorry, I've been trying to not get too distracted by these combat encounters, but too much brain power is being used, I think. But anyway, concordance is that idea of, like, even people that disagree on the pragmatic approach can still get along because they have this idea of, like, not only that people should be free to do whatever they want as long as they're not interfering with each other. But I think, like, the ultimate expression of it would be when people are, like, they love how multicultural and varied our society is, right? Like, I suppose the idea that I grew up with was the melting pot, right? America is the great melting pot, where everybody's doing their own thing, and the fact that it's so varied and diverse is beautiful in and of itself. And that idea, at least in its idealized form, is what I would think of as concordance, as opposed to simply... I do wish you wouldn't do that. It's concordance as opposed to just peace, you know? So... I'm sorry, I got on a bit of a tangent again, but I think that concordance is really the important goal, and that is what's dangerous about aggression. Is it disturbs concordance, and that's when the problems start to arise. But that doesn't necessarily mean that cultivating peace will lay the foundation, and sorry, I tried to say lay the groundwork and the foundation at the same time, but cultivating peace in yourself and in your community doesn't necessarily mean that you are vulnerable to more aggressive people, because it depends on how you respond wisely. So the two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So I guess to try and wrap it up and simplify it a little bit, my short answer would be no, because there is a way to respond to aggressive tendencies in a wise manner. That doesn't necessarily involve aggression or the disruption of concordance. Although I guess it could be argued that in the act of trying to disrupt these aggressive policies, in the act of resisting them, you are technically speaking going against concordance, in the sense that you are no longer behaving in that very like hands-off attitude. You are taking a stand against it, and you are setting yourself against the other person, and that's where the mindfulness comes in, and you say, like, look, these people are not my enemies. I'm not going to destroy them. I'm not going to hurt them. I'm going to do everything I can to stop them from hurting other people, and even from accomplishing their goals, which may hurt other people. And they may be sad about it, but the goal of it is not to destroy. That's sort of the very broad way of approaching it wisely, I think. And the one does not necessarily negate the other, is the simple way of putting it. And I suppose on the topic of counteracting other people's agenda, you know, like I said, if you want to be technical about it, that can technically be considered going against concordance. But I also think that there does come a point, like, don't get me wrong, I love semantics, and I like picking apart these ideas and kind of taking them to the extreme, and really exploring the edges of these things. But if we're being pragmatic about it, I do think that's getting into the weeds a little too much. And so instead, I would say that it's not going against concordance to stand your ground and be adamant about maintaining wisdom both in yourself and in the people around you. Sorry, I have my TV muted right now, so I'm sure there's like lots of sound effects and stuff going on, so I hope that's not too distracting, but I can't hear it. So I hope I'm not getting talked over too much. I'll just turn it down in editing. Whatever, it's fine. Sorry, another side tangent. And so on that topic, then, that leads us rather nicely, I think, into the first question that I asked, which Now that I think about it, I probably should have just read them in reverse order so that we go first, second, third, but too late now. Sorry about that. But anyway, so the question as I wrote it down was, how do I justify placing my ideology above others? Um, excuse me. And I did ask for a little bit of clarification on this because especially on the term placing over, because that was I more or less transcribed that from our conversation, and I did ask this person, what exactly do you mean by that? And the sense that I got is like he used the example of flat Earth, where it's like, I believe that the flat Earth is not true, and should not be taught in school, and so how do I justify making that or at least this is how I interpreted what they were saying. How do I justify that being the thing that we teach to people, right? And this again goes back to the idea of concordance, where I think as much as the flat Earth movement is just silly, I don't know another way to say it other than it really comes across as people just being like so contrarian and wanting to be so against the tide that they've kind of deluded themselves to a degree. It's very strange phenomenon, I think. But to bring it back to the main point, how do I justify saying this is right, this is how we ought to proceed, in a world where we know we're not going to get it right 100% of the time? So how do I justify one idea over the other? And I suppose that I think that the underlying assumption of our society is one of pragmatism, in the sense that we want to make sure that we are accomplishing something. Like at the most basic level, we want to accomplish something, right? Like, I know that is very broad, almost to the point of uselessness, but I think that is, I think we can all agree that is, a super foundational idea. And so from that, the question is, well, what do, like, in the terms of school, like, why don't we, quote unquote, teach the controversy, is a phrase that I think at least some people may be familiar with, of flat Earth versus round Earth, right? Like, why don't we teach why the flat Earth is wrong in school? Why do we only teach, the round Earth and how we know that the Earth is round and stuff like that? And then it goes, like, from there we have to back up a step and say, well, okay, so what is even the purpose of a school? And, well, the school is to teach our future generations, and it has been said, in fact, that schools as they exist now in the United States are really to make more productive workers to fuel the economy, because we are kind of obsessed with the economy as a culture, not just as Americans, but really in the West. Like, how much of our discussion revolves around the economy and various aspects of it. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong, like incorrect about that, but it is a little weird sometimes. Especially when it comes to schools, where, like I say, I think that the underlying assumption of schools is to make students that can enter the workforce and be productive and be a net positive on reality, as opposed to teaching students because human beings love to learn things, and because learning about the world is fascinating, and because having a basic understanding of the world taught from school as like an overview of, I guess we're not getting those, okay, like having this basic overview that can be taught in school will lead to people that are better about learning about the world, right? That is another way that we could think of as the underlying assumption of schools. It's not the one we currently have, but it is another way of approaching it. And of course that raises its own problems, but the point is that, like, that is a little less pragmatic. And so, how do we justify, like, it to answer the terms of nuts? To answer in terms of how do we, as in how are we presently justifying this? Well, it's because the flat Earth isn't practical. It doesn't make good workers because it doesn't make any good predictions about the world. And to broaden the scope a little bit away from just school and just like in general, how do we justify holding some views over others? Like why don't most people believe in flat Earth? Because it doesn't accord with reality. They come up with a lot of ad hoc explanations, but more often than not, those explanations either contradict each other or are so convoluted and unprovable that it's just like most people can sense, even if they can't articulate it in like classical logical terms, they can sense that it's like it doesn't track, you know. And so it is that very pragmatical viewpoint of like, well, I am looking to discover the truth, and this is not getting me closer to that. Um, and then I think the real question, what I think that this question was being asked in the context of the discussion we were having, what I think the question was is, I feel like when I place my ideology above others and I say that this is the way that we should go, I feel like I'm kind of being a jerk to people. And so I need some kind of logical justification to say, like, look, this is the most pragmatic way forward. And so, yes, maybe it is kind of being a little mean sometimes, but it's for a good reason. And is the sort of question that we then wrestle with is it a good enough reason to justify what we're doing? And so that, I think, is where personal cultivation comes in, where, again, at the most basic level, if you don't want to worry about it, you can just go and live on a mountain and not worry about it. Like, again, that is an option in the most literal and unhelpful sense. And so the point of that is that I guess the point of me bringing up that it's an option is because that is where the expanded viewpoint comes in. That's where you stop focusing on conventional reality and bring yourself back into ultimate reality. And so if you want to focus on ultimate reality, that's great. It's not necessarily better than conventional reality. Because, again, better as a term relies on certain assumptions that you don't have to accept if you don't want to. You really do have a lot of freedom in this if you really want. But to bring it back to the way that the question was being phrased, I think that personal cultivation is where this sort of comes into its own, or at least one of the ways where it does, where it's like, we don't reject flat earthers to be a jerk to flat earthers, right? Like, we're not saying you are incorrect because we want to laugh at that, like some people do. And that's why I kind of stopped watching those debunking channels a lot, is because they really lean into, whether on purpose or on accident, just as the way human minds work, they do kind of lean into this sort of like, haha, look at these idiots kind of mentality. And you don't have to do that. So when we reject the flat earth, if you're approaching it from the idea of like, this isn't correct and this doesn't get us further into the goals that we want to accomplish, like, there isn't necessarily a conflict between prioritizing one point of view over another and also cultivating wisdom in yourself. And I guess maybe I should point out that wisdom, I'm not necessarily using as a synonym to intelligence, right? Like, you're not wise because you understand that the earth is not flat, right? It's not like that kind of thing. But it's more just, you are wise because you have this greater view, and you can operate on both the conventional and the ultimate level as the need arises, or even as your thoughts come and go, you know. And so I guess the question is, like, to circle back to the question, I would ask another question in turn. When you are thinking about these ideas, what is it that you're setting as your goal that you're trying to accomplish against which you are measuring these ideas? And I don't want to speak for this person, but again, I've known them for quite a while, and I think I have a decent idea of who they are as a person. And so to address my friend specifically, and anyone else who is similarly minded, as I think I am too. I am inclined to think in this way, and it has changed a little bit as I have been on my own journey here. No, I don't want to deal with you. Oh, I guess they want to deal with me. Okay. But the goal that is being set in a lot of cases is um, to to believe in ideas that are most concordant with what we observe about the natural world. Or I suppose to put it in terms that are a little more consistent with terms that I have been using thus far, is to make your conventional reality, the terms that you have used to divide up the world, to make your conventional reality most align with what we observe in the natural world, I suppose, and to put it a little less, you know, self-indulgent, is to just, you know, have an accurate view of the world, you know, to have the way that you see the world be the most correct and the most in line with the world that we actually have, and to put it in another language, to match our ideas to the data that we have. You know, like, I think just putting it that simply is, I think, something that will resonate with a lot of people. And so, how do I justify putting my ideas above others? Well, I mean, in a lot of cases, it can be as simple as this just fits the data a whole lot better. And if you can bear in mind that, like, if you can always keep in the back of your head, this may not be the perfect right answer, but it is the most right answer that I have available to me right now, then you can justify saying, like, look, this is what I'm going to hold because I have presented before me two options, and this one is the one that is most in accordance with the data that I have. Right? That's a very logical and pragmatic way of going about it, and something that I think is very prevalent in Western cultures, especially. I think that has been basically since, you know, the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and all those sorts of big events. Like, that has been a very common theme for a very long time in the West, and that is certainly one way to go about it. But I, of course, think that this person would also be concerned with things like national policy, right? Like, like, for me personally, how would I go about justifying the statement that we should put more funding into something like public education as opposed to something like the military? You know, like, or I suppose you could also extend that a little further and a little more pointedly and say, how do I justify a statement like defund the police? You know, and not in the sense of, like, the propagandized sense of, like, literally take away all of their funding, but how do I justify saying, like, look, we need to take all this funding that is currently going to militarizing our police and put it more towards a more distributed approach to fighting crime, of counteracting mental illness, not by arresting all of the mentally ill people, but by funding psychologists that are available to help these people and meet them where they're at, and giving more funding to rehabilitation centers so that people can get off of drugs more easily and stuff like that. Like, how do I justify statements like that? And again, to simply have that approach earlier of, like, I am setting as my goal, like, it does sort of run the risk of you set too many goals and you have to be super careful about how you define your goals and whatnot, but I don't think there's anything wrong with taking a bit of a shortcut and saying, like, look, these things have proven to be better for people, and they've led to, like, at the risk of getting a little too close to home, but like, we've seen so many people getting into violent altercations with the police, and I don't think there's nothing to the argument that it's like if you just comply with lawful orders, then you won't get shot as much. Like, there is something to that, but I also think that there is, like, it seems to me that the other side is never addressed by the people who say that sort of thing, where it's like, well, okay, but why is it that the outcome is always that they get shot? You know, like, why are we comfortable with people getting shot and killed over this? Why is that the way we're okay with our system operating? And there is something to be said that it's just like, I want the cops to stop shooting people less. And I don't want people to be using restraints that restrict people's breathing so much. You know, like that sort of thing. It's easy to, like, you can go the easier route and just say, like, look, I just want cops to stop shooting people. Let's train them a little more. Let's put more funding into training them into de-escalation procedures more than they currently are. And so I guess to sort of... oops, I shouldn't have done that. Oh. Well, I'm glad I did that. That was kind of nice. So, I suppose that the simple answer to that question is, well, what exactly are your priorities that you're setting? You know? And, of course, then that raises the secondary question of, well, why am I setting these priorities? How do I justify setting these priorities? And on one level, I think there does come a point where you just kind of have to assert a brute fact about what you believe in. And it is okay to draw that line sooner rather than later, right? Where it's like, if I just say, like, look, I want our government to be good to people, and that's why I believe that we should reallocate the funds for the police into things that will benefit more people in a healthier way. Like, you can just say, this is where I draw the line, and I think I'm just going to call it a very simple principle, and you can leave it to others to really dig into that and explore in more detail how we justify statements like that. And I suppose that in itself sort of leads to this idea of, like, it's really easy to fall down a rabbit hole here and just keep defining more and more and more terms and wanting to push the boundaries of the brute facts that we draw. And I think something that I have learned to come to terms with, and I don't mean to disparage my friend, of course, but I think something that this particular friend of mine should perhaps consider in more detail is this idea of, like, how do I put this? This idea of, we have to learn where our own limits are and learn to understand that we don't have to keep pressing further and further if it's causing us too much distress. I think that is a very important defining factor, especially for someone like me, where, sorry, I'm sure that showed up in the recording, but, like, for someone like me, it is super easy to fall into that rabbit hole and just be like, but what about this, and what about this, and what about this, and that, and just get lost in it forever. And there does come a point where you have to basically practice self-discipline and just say, like, okay, we can talk about that at some point, but let's see if we can't rein ourselves back in a little bit, come up with a general strategy, and sort of work with a smaller, perhaps less precise framework in the name of coming up with a framework at all, you know, so we're not just endlessly defining terms over and over again. In essence, basically saying, like, I'm just going to assert this as true for the sake of argument. from there, of course, the question is how do we deal with people who are not willing to assert that and who take a different set of axioms, you know? And this is where we start to get back into the question of concordance, where it's like, ideally, you and this other person would sit down and say, like, okay, look, what are the assumptions here that we are all willing to agree on? You know, like, where are we willing to budge, and where are we willing to agree, and things like this. And I think the problem that we're running into that leads to this question being asked in the first place in a sort of roundabout way is, again, the fact that we as a culture are really unhealthy. Like, not physically, but spiritually, mentally, emotionally. You know, where, like, our tendency is to draw these lines, and we, instead of saying, let's work this through, we say, this is where the line is drawn, and if you're wrong, if you don't agree with that, you're an idiot. You know, and I think that is one of the most poisonous effects that social media has had on us. It's like, you know, the stereotypical joke about Twitter. I still cannot call it X. I still call it Twitter. But the stereotypical joke about people on social media in general, but particularly on Twitter/X, is like, you know, someone says, oh, I like pancakes, and then someone else comes in and says, oh, so you hate waffles? It's like, no, that is not at all what I said. You have just chosen to just, like, draw the lines in the sand and stick by them no matter what, and you're just not willing at all to treat other people as friends and as cohabitants of this nation and things like that. And so we sort of, that's where I think, like, this sort of cycle comes in, where it's like, okay, so why does it feel so weird for someone like me or my friend to draw these lines? Is because I think that I don't know for sure, but I suspect that this friend of mine is about the same age as me, and so they have also grown up in this sort of same environment where, like I say, people have taken this idea of drawing a line and taken it to, like, way too far, and said instead that, you know, this is the only way that the line can be drawn. And that is a manifestation of the poor health of our culture. And how do we fix that? I think that goes back to what I was saying previously, where it's like we have to take it upon ourselves to cultivate wisdom and peace and love and compassion within ourselves, and then also spread that around to the people around us, right? And I think that is the way we're going to do it. We're not going to promote this health and change this aspect of our society by writing a law that says it's illegal for you to say these things on Twitter, right? Like, that's a huge debate that's come up recently. Like, you know, is it censorship to ban people on Twitter who say horrible stuff? You know, and that's kind of the controversy that's been coming up. Like, you know, I remember not long after Elon Musk took over, you know, there was a big hubbub about the fact that, you know, people were spewing horrible stuff on Twitter because it was heralded as the return of free speech and we can say whatever we want, you know. And I understand the argument, and, you know, Elon Musk liked to prop himself up as a champion of free speech, and I think that it just paved the way for unwisdom. I don't know if there's a word for that, but for people to really not only allow themselves to be more entrenched in a lack of wisdom, but to also spread it around further. And it contributed more to this trend that we've been seeing of people just being horrible to each other. And so, I guess to try and answer the question a little more succinctly, how do I justify placing my ideology over others? I would say that the reason that I feel a little uncomfortable and inclined to ask this question in the first place is because I have this sense that if I am propping my own ideas up, I am necessarily putting other ideas down. And the reason I feel like that, and I'm speaking for myself here, not necessarily for my friend, although I suspect that my friend may be thinking along similar lines if he were to sat down and thinking man a little bit about it, like if I think he would probably agree with me, but just to be clear, I'm speaking purely for myself here. The reason I'm uncomfortable with this is because I am so used to this framework of this good, therefore this other thing bad, that like it feels hostile to make that stand. And so that makes me ask this question of how do I even navigate? How do I draw lines without being hostile? And so that is where I would encourage someone who is thinking like if I am sitting with myself and thinking about this, what I would counsel myself and to anyone who is also thinking about this and I would like to think that people will agree with me that this is sort of at least on the right path to diagnosing the problem correctly. And if you agree with that, then the way that I would counsel it is if we focus on doing this to ourselves and to the people around us, then it will sort of sort itself out. Like as much as the whole interconnectedness of our world with social media goes both ways, right? So yes, it has allowed this this very hostile attitude to spread and to become this just world-spanning swamp. It's like everybody is stuck in the mud and it's everywhere. But at the same time, it also allows us for the opportunity to be like, look, when I say to reach out to the people around you, in the days of the Buddha, that would have meant either in your own community or, if you were so inclined, to be a wandering monk and to spread these ideas physically, to walk around and go and talk to people. And I think there is certainly something to that, in the sense that it gives you a more face-to-face and more personal interaction with people. But at the same time, we also live in an era where, by the same mechanism that it has spread and become this worldwide swamp of slop, of just horrible cruelty to each other, we can turn that same network into the mechanism by which we interact with people all over the world. And so when we're kind to people and we spread these ideas of compassion and wisdom, we're not just spreading it to the people in our small towns or in our neighborhoods or whatever. We can branch out all over the world. We have that opportunity. And so I think while it has been transposed somewhat, it's the same. The problem lends itself to its own solution, in a sense. And so I don't think it is easy to get lost in the disappointment that we feel. Or at least for me, it is very easy to just look around at what we've built and be so disappointed. Sorry, I'm going to get this guy here because he's going to give me a little bit of money. It's so easy to look around and just be so upset, and just not want to deal with it, and to just sort of write it off as a lost cause and instead say, okay, how do we rewrite the system and fix it? And I don't think that's necessarily the way to go about it, as I've sort of explored it a little more. I think there is something to be said for turning the system into its own solution, And so that, again, that's kind of what I'm hoping to accomplish with this. Is right now my channel is fairly small and I don't reach a huge audience, and that's fine, because eventually, if you're willing to like and subscribe and join the Discord and spread it around, You know, if I am successful, I don't have to worry about it, because just by exploring these ideas and cultivating this in myself and doing it in a way that reaches out to people, it will naturally spread itself and start to correct the problem. And it may not happen in our lifetimes, to be perfectly honest. It may be something that just gets the trend rolling, and that is okay. It took us a long time to get to this point. It may take us a long time to get out. But we do it so that we encourage the health of our people in the long run. We do it for others, even if we don't necessarily see the benefit for ourselves. And that's why it does rely on you cultivating just love and compassion for the world around you. And as you walk this path, you may find it gets easier to accept that, like, look, I'm just doing this because it seems like a nice thing to do. I'm not doing it because I think it is the best pragmatically way to go about this. I'm doing it just because it's nice to be nice to people. And it may fall in on itself eventually, but that's okay, because these ideas will persist. And if they don't persist, then, maybe not in this life, but in the next. You start to develop a sort of grander view of these things. But that's kind of its own discussion. I think to just sort of keep it on track, I would simply say, like, we tackle this problem of justifying certain viewpoints over another by asking a different question of, how do I just cultivate peace and kindness around me? And I understand that may feel a little circular. Sorry, I don't know what this is. Seems to me I bet maybe that's Mountain Shaper's home. I don't know. No, it's Mooncarver. I remember there was a quest further down there that involved him. But anyway, I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit, but maybe I'm getting the idea across of, like, again, I am a little biased here just because of where I am in my spiritual journey, but I am inclined to say that we may find that the answer to our question lies more in just remembering to cultivate ourselves. And by doing that with ourselves and being willing to reach out to others, this problem will sort itself out in a weird sort of way. This is the corporate world has co-opted this term, but I think it is more the original definition of synergy, right? Where it is emergent properties of complex systems, especially of people, that are sort of working towards their own ends, but in doing so, in the context of a larger system, they accomplish bigger things than they initially set out to do, right? And I think there's something to that, and I think maybe we're just at a point in our society where that's kind of the best way forward, where we've tried to buckle down and enforce these things. Maybe it's time to try a new tack. So I guess that's how I would answer the question, is we reframe it and return ourselves to focusing on our own inner cultivation, and in doing so, spread it around. So I hope that I hope that is a sufficient answer to the question. And if not, like, let's talk about it. If you're watching this and you're interested in it, I'm half joking about it, but I'm also serious about it. Like, please come and join the Discord and let's talk about it, and let's think these through and see what interesting ideas we can come up with. I'm genuinely interested. And to my friend, I certainly hope to not come across like I'm speaking for him or anything like that, but I'm sure he understands, and I'd like to think that, I hope it helps, and of course this friend and I will certainly talk about this more, and I very much look forward to it. But for the time being, we've made ourselves kind of into joining karst, and my goodness, it's quite a view from up here, isn't it? Man, this game is so pretty. I love this game. Just kind of wandering around is really nice. But anyway, I think I'm going to leave it there for now. And again, questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the description, or in the comment section rather. Come and join the Discord. Let's talk about it, and let's figure this out. I'm very interested, and I hope you are too. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it there for now, and until the next episode, I'll see you later.